And hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Unslaved Podcast. My name is David Whitehead, and we are thrilled to be here once again with Michael Black. Michael Black is back. He took a little hiatus for a while, and now he's back making videos on YouTube. We're so glad that he's doing that. He's a political commenter, occult philosopher, and intelligence analyst. And we've had him on in the past, and we definitely want to have him back for this particular show. We're going to be discussing Michael Tsarian's new groundbreaking work entitled Dragon Mother. That's going to be getting into child psychology, female psychology, everybody's psychology. We all are sons and daughters. We all have parents, and we all understand very deeply that, or hopefully we do, that our psychology is shaped in our very young formative years. And then, of course, there's all these various influences that come in from society and from our education and from the people we hang about, but we don't often talk in depth about the role of the mother in this whole discussion. And in our current political and social discussion right now, with the rise of neo-feminism and everybody pointing the finger at the evil patriarchy and how it's all the man's fault, we decided to balance the scales here today and discuss how that is not entirely the case. So, Michael Black, welcome back, my friend. We're so glad to have you back on the Unslaved Podcast.
Thank you very much, my dear friends. It's a pleasure to be here again, speaking with both of you fine gentlemen. It's a very interesting subject matter, and it's one that definitely needs to be explored. Michael Tsarian's book is one I'd recommend to pretty much anyone if you want to understand why the world is in the state that it's in right now. Most of it is due to bad parenting, and Tsarian does go into this in terms of how this all comes about. Those are, well, there are many subject areas I think that we'll be touching on today. So it'll be good to get into that.
Absolutely. Well, let's kick it off with a quote from the book. This is from Michael's book, Dragon Mother. It comes from the introduction. So, what he says here is every child grows to adulthood bearing the emotional complexion determined by his or her mother in the days and weeks after conception. Since she, like all humans, bears within herself, on a non conscious level, the disturbance of bygone days, it goes without saying that her child will likewise inherit the traumatic condition. This is the situation on a personal level and for society as a whole. The inviolable fact to acknowledge in the pursuit of health in all situations is that present trauma bioenergetically stirs and even awakens the memory of previous experiences of trauma. Once this fact sinks in, we'll be able to explain a great deal when it comes to deviant and pathological behavior. We'll be able to expertly see what so many sages professed about the intimate connections between psychic and physical energy. And Michael Tsarian, great quote. You want to get into that a little more for people here?
Oh, well, first, yeah, I'd like to do that and also welcome Michael back as well. Glad to speak to you because there's not many people we could have invited. You know, a lot of people will be criticizing us right off. Hey, what's these three guys talking about? There's no chicks there. Yeah, well, line up, chicks. Whenever you want, we'll talk about your psychology. But Michael, this was actually meant to happen in May, this very same interview. So again, it's great to be able to get to it right now. But as you said, David, we are sons and daughters. So you don't actually have to be mothers who are going to experience birth to talk about these things or to address it. And right now, the other point that you made is very, very true. Because of the situation we're in right now, this very dialogue, this very subject matter is the way that our society is becoming feminized. It's actually preventing this very kind of investigation. So never let anybody who's listening to this think of it as just another podcast, so to speak. These subjects need to be broadcast a lot, especially when you also see that the media and even the alternative subject matter people are not dealing with any of this. So they're not dealing with psychology at all. They'd rather have, a commentary on, the Trump presidency or the imminent collapse of civilization or chemtrails or, a JFK and the Rockefellers and all of that. I've said so many times is incredibly valuable. We need to keep one ear on that. But if you're looking for true solutions, don't we understand that it is a person's psychology? It's their whole psychological outlook that's actually making them vote for certain parties, making them vote for the wholesale feminization of society. So it all does come back, in my eyes, you see, to this whole question of psychology. And no, as on a personal note, I'm not going. Dragon Mother is a triumph for me. It started in 1989, and I'm glad the way it came out. But it took the right time and the right place and the right means to get it out. And I know I'm not going to be silent. I know that a lot of people out there, and even in this movement, want to avoid the psychology because they have a tacit agreement with themselves to hide in the light, so to speak. And in the headlines and in all the minutiae. And as I said, that's very, very important to know. It's key to this whole alternative movement. But so is psychology. And you and I, David, have gone to great length, in our podcast. So, but as I said, just last week or not last week, but the week before in Great Women show that I did, a human being's psychology is what is determining their political outlook. I want to get your comments on that, Michael. How does that ring to you specifically? Do you see that? I mean, I go into detail talking about the lunar and the solar worlds, and those are just catchphrases for the fact that when you're under the auspices and dominion of the mother, we can just call it lunar, in that sense, because it's motherly and it's domestic and it has very positive aspects as well. And then as we progress mentally, to past the age of 7, we're now inhabitants of the so-called solar world. But before we even get into those sort of details, what's your take on the validity of psychology in the alternative research community? What's your take on that?
It's absolutely imperative that we understand our own psychology as human beings, both as individuals and on a group level. And too many people in the alternative media aren't prepared to even broach that subject. It could be partly because they don't understand enough about it themselves, or that they haven't looked into the subject itself. But I think it's a case of not wanting to face up to the realities that we are all fundamentally a part of the problem. We are all a part of the problem, and we're not looking at things that way. We want to see ourselves, we want to cast ourselves in the image of the hero as if we're here to save civilization. But the reality is something very different, and that's due to our own individual actions, our emotions, our thoughts, the spiritual paths which we pursue. And that does stem from our own psychological perspective, because our psychology dictates what our perspective is going to be. Another quick thing I would say is that how this relates to parental problems, shall we say, or more specifically in the case of the subject that we're talking about, issues with how people are raised by their mothers, is because the mother is the first teacher of the child. Too many times people forget this. Most of the lessons that we've learned in life, we've learned intuitively, and we've learned them through the process of imputation as opposed to learning directly. Okay, we watch adults as we're growing older and see how they behave with one another. And the most sort of smallest aspect of that, the microcosmic aspect of that, would be how parents interact with one another. Now, the female psychological state of mind is quite important, because not only, as I say, is the mother the first teacher of the child, but you've also got the mother-child bond, which forms while the child is gestating during pregnancy. So that is integral, I think, in terms of shaping how we become the human beings that we do in fact become.
And this is really,
And
like
of
you
course,
said, I was just going to mention that
go ahead.
this is a very taboo to talk about today in the current climate because, as I was saying a little bit there, the blame is usually placed on the role of the father being, you know, I guess more of the solar energy, as you're saying, Michael. But like the blame is put on the father because there's a lot of, I guess, in university and school through the media, there's this whole push. It's a feminism, the over feminization of males, the fact that we're being told that any kind of masculine expression is negative somehow. And it seems like if nobody's read any material from these great psychologists and thinkers from the past that have always been talking about how, well, repression is a bad thing. And if you repress your emotions, if there's any kind of repressive energy in the home from either the mother or the father, that alone, just that one thing, can drastically change the psychology of a child. And all of these facts are just not being brought into this big discussion right now. And it seems like it's just a finger pointing game. And I just want to say that from reading Michael's book and talking to him and talking to you, Michael Black, as well, we're not here to point fingers at all women or all men or this group or that group. We're here to get to the truth about what is really going on and what is the actual solutions. We have people asking us all the time, what's the solution to all of this stuff? Well, this is where we start, is with the understanding of your psychology, my psychology, and the psychology of our children. Because if you look around at the rates of depression, the rates of suicide, the rates of homicide in the younger generations right now, it's absolutely staggering. And that's not just because people own guns or just like they try to simplify these arguments. It's because of what's been going on in the home. Is that right?
Well, I
Yeah,
would say it's
certainly.
definitely
And
the case.
yeah.
Michael
Sorry,
Black, go
I
ahead.
was going to say, I was just going to make this point. I would say that's definitely the case. One of the things that you touched on there, David, which is quite important, and again, people need to understand this side of things as well, is that we've got this dualistic worldview being presented continuously and constantly through the academies, through the not only the education system, but also societally as well, politically, you name it. Things are being shoved down people's throats. When it comes to the relationship between men and women, this is where it gets especially dangerous because you have this men versus women mentality rather than see what they try and do is to cast men and women as polar opposites instead of being and this is going to irk a lot of people who are social justice warriors, I don't doubt, but you've got that happening instead of seeing men and women as two binary expressions within a continuum, right? So when you cast them as opposing forces, you're doing tremendous damage to the minds of the young people that are growing up believing this garbage.
Right.
Okay, rather than seeing men and women as being complementary to one another, there are differences in them in terms of how they think, perhaps in certain respects, but also in terms of behaviors, physical strengths, other attributes, you name it. And pointing fingers is totally unhelpful because this creates what I call unipolarization. And this is what they're doing. They're unipolarizing men, they're unipolarizing women. And unipolarization is not at odds with dualism. In fact, it's a very important part of that.
Yeah, part of dualism, exactly. That's what we're really against here, because now that they've done this, and the other side is out there talking about this concept of the malignant masculinity, that's the result of what you're talking about. Whether that phenomena actually really exists in the 3D world is, a whole other subject. But the idea of it pervade through the socialist Fabian network of the schools in the institutions you're talking about has made it exist where it probably doesn't really exist at all. And now we have to address it. So you're quite right. This has enormous consequences. And even if you think, no, it definitely exists, I've seen it, I've experienced it. My work is all about is to try and say, okay, then hypothetically sweep it away and replace it with this gynocracy, the gynocratic model of your Ellie Sagans and whatever, and see, and envision whether that's going to work for you. And our societies are doing that right now, or are hoping to do it. But my points earlier were, slightly facetious. I do mean it somewhat, that it's difficult to find women who can talk about female psychology in the way that we're doing right now. But of course, it's not, as David said, to point fingers at all. Far from it. I'm looking at the roots of the malignant masculinity that the feminists are talking about. I want to find out, is their account? That's all Dragon Mother is an account, is a critique of their account. We have the perfect right to say, I don't believe your account, even if the thing is there. There is a solar world, there is a phallocentric world, there is an androcentric world, and I loathe a lot of aspects of it, as they do. But is their account of its origins to be accepted? See, and Dragon Mother says, no, it's not. But okay, let's move on and ask you, to balance things out. You know, as well as I do, that there is a sacred feminine or a sacred femininity. Isn't that right, Michael? And that concept is very, very important, because you don't have healthy masculinity without it. So, in fact, what you get is the chivalric male and the feminized male, the types that I talk about in the 3rd chapter of the book. These are not real males, even though they may look 100% James Bond, Simon Templar, they may look the perfect model for it, but they're really not, are they? But what do you say about the sacred feminine as well, to balance things out?
Well, we don't talk about the sacred feminine in this society, do we? We never ever look into that. What is the sacred feminine all about? The ability to empathize, to love, to care for. These are all very, very important parts of what makes us human beings. And yet, that is all rejected in favor of this, as you called it, Michael Tsarian, this malignant worldview of what men and women are. this is a very, very destructive way of creating a society.